LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 7th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the dozen best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. My main topic, as you can see from the title of the video, is Republicans say insurrection is legitimate political discourse. That's one of the breaking news from Friday. The breaking news items from Friday. The Republican National Committee voted to oppose to censure Representative Adam Kinzinger and Representative Liz Cheney, two Republicans who are on the January 6th investigation committee from the House of Representatives, and as part of that censure, they said that the January 6th committee was persecuting people who engaged in legitimate political discourse. So the January 6th insurrection apparently is legitimate political discourse. That by itself could have been my political comedy for this week, but actually for my political comedy I'm going to use another piece of breaking news, this Washington Post story that talked about how President Trump would tear up all of these documents that he got as president, which is a direct violation of the Presidential Records Act. And that's something Neal Katyal talked about over on MSNBC's Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart yesterday. And then he makes this kind of joke that I will talk about a little more after we watch it together over here.
The revelations this week, Jonathan, are that Donald Trump actually tore up all of these memos, so that investigators couldn't see all of that. And, maybe that's what Steve Bannon meant by the deconstruction of the administrative state or something. I don't know. But it's certainly illegal. So, the Presidential Records Act forbids that. That's an easy crime for prosecutors to go after in Merrick Garland's Justice Department. The president was warned about this. This is an easy case, and I really hope that the Justice Department's looking into it.
Now, I like that joke because it's kind of obscure. It's talking about how Steve Bannon, while President Trump was still running for office, back when he had the Breitbart news platform, was talking about how one of the big objectives of Trump and Trumpism was the deconstruction of the administrative state. And what that means is, one of the reasons the federal government is so big is because over the years, the executive branch has started to do all these quasi-legislative functions through these administrative agencies. This is something that Congress and the president have gotten together on over the years, because Congress creates or passes the legislation that creates these administrative agencies, like OSHA or EPA or all those agencies, and they engage in rulemaking, which is kind of legislative, even though they're executive branch agencies, and that's the administrative state that creates all these regulations that Bannon wanted to get rid of. But so tearing up presidential documents is the deconstruction of the administrative state. It's just a joke, but a very obscure one that I kind of liked. But the other thing about that comment, though, from Neal Katyal, he says that it's an easy crime to prosecute, violation of the Presidential Records Act. But actually, as a former criminal defense attorney, I read the statute. I put a link down in the video description to all my sources that I'm discussing, including the Presidential Records Act. And if you look at it, there's no punishment. There's no enforcement. That doesn't look like a criminal law to me. And if there's no punishment specified, if it doesn't say that it's punishable by a fine or some term of imprisonment, never says it's a crime, never says anyone can prosecute it, I think it's just one of those laws that they passed because they never thought that presidents would be disobeying the law, that they just assumed, they didn't think they'd have to make it a crime. Because I guess the president can be impeached for violating it, but I'm not sure that you can prosecute someone, certainly a president, for violating the Presidential Records Act. I don't know. You can look at the act yourself at the link I put down there. If you show me anywhere where it says it's a crime, it says the president shall preserve the records or whatever. But it never says what happens if he or she doesn't. So that's my commentary on that. And I don't know what you thought of the joke, but now I'm going to get to the news summaries from longest to shortest. And oh, look at that! I just got a super chat contribution from Matthew, so I appreciate that right at the beginning. So that's a way to like keep my spirits up at the beginning of the program. So thank you for that. And now I'll get to the news summaries. The first, the longest news summary was NBC News' Meet the Press. I don't think it was the best one. It was mostly on Ukraine, and it's Chuck Todd, not with a pre-recorded package, but doing an interview with Richard Engel, who's in Ukraine, and they mentioned something I talked about a couple of weeks ago, that the Ukrainian people apparently don't think that the invasion that everyone is worried about, the Russian invasion, is imminent. I don't know if this deserves to be the top story. I guess it depends on whether Russia actually invades Ukraine or if it's all just hype for a better negotiating position. And I almost get the feeling that this wasn't supposed to be the top story, that NBC News Meet the Press was going to do the legitimate political discourse story, because later they have a pre-recorded package. I'm going to show that to you later about that topic before they have Mark Short on, who's the former chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence. But I'll get to that when I get to that news summary, or that news summary that from NBC that wasn't at the beginning of the program. Here's the news summary that was at the beginning of the program. Chuck Todd, Richard Engel, talking a little bit about some of these other issues, but then about the Ukraine. It's like the Beijing Olympics, and then the meeting between Putin and Xi, the Chinese president and the Russian president. And what's really interesting about that part of the news summary is it's actually very close to the way Fox News covered it, and that's the second news summary I'll show you. But here's the first one from NBC News' Meet the Press that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And a good Sunday morning. In 2008, during the Summer Olympic Games in Beijing, Russian troops invaded neighboring Georgia. The then Prime Minister of Russia, Vladimir Putin, declared from Beijing, war has started. In 2014, Russian troops moved into Crimea just days after Putin returned from the Winter Olympics in Sochi. And now, with the Winter Games underway in Beijing and with Putin in attendance, the world is left to guess, is Putin about to pull the trigger again, this time on Ukraine? U.S. plans for a diplomatic boycott of the Games have largely fizzled, and Putin has found an ally in China's leader, Xi Jinping. On Friday, Putin met with Xi, who offered strong support for Russia in its standoff with the West, at least publicly. The two issued a joint statement saying friendship between the two states has no limits. China has offered political support to Russia over Ukraine, including blocking U.S.-sponsored action at the UN Security Council. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, has been covering the buildup of Russia's military forces. He's on the border of Russia and Ukraine, and eastern Ukraine. And Richard, this is a case, I think, of watch what they do, don't necessarily listen to what Russia says. What do you see, Richard?
Well, we're seeing a massive military buildup. This is unlike anything I've seen since the American 2003 buildup before it launched the war in Iraq. And I think that's why we're hearing these really dire intelligence assessments coming out from U.S. officials, that if there was a war, there could be 50,000 Ukrainians killed, 25,000 soldiers, 10,000 Russian troops, 1 to 5 million refugees are internally displaced. And these dire warnings are now being heard in Ukraine. For the last several days, several weeks, people had been living in a kind of suspended disbelief that maybe this was just Russia bluffing, that Russia was trying to get some diplomatic advantage. Now people are starting to believe this could happen, and it could happen potentially imminently. So we're starting to see rallies in government in major cities. We're seeing more and more people signing up for volunteer service. We're hearing more of a fighting spirit from people. When I ask people, what are they going to do? And they say, we will fight until the end. And I think because this country won't be a walkover, that's why those intelligence estimates are so high for what the cost might be. But Ukrainians also know that if it comes to fighting, they are going to have to fight Russia by themselves, that NATO has promised support, it's sending in some weapons, but at the end of the day, no isn't coming in here to help them. So Ukrainians will only have their own troops and their own defense systems like these trenches to fight off Russia.
Richard Engel, like I said, he's on the border right now of Russia and Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine. Richard, thank you. And joining me now is the National Security Advisor to President Biden, Jake Sullivan. Jake, welcome.
Sounds like Jake Sullivan has some barking dogs in the background there right at the beginning, but I don't have any clips of Jake Sullivan, even though he was on a couple programs. Like I said, I am of the opinion, as I've talked about for a few weeks, that the Ukraine story is being overcovered because, I mean, as horrendous as the outcome would be if Russia decides to invade, I still think the signs are pointing towards bargaining leverage more than an actual full-scale invasion. Maybe there'll be some minor incursion. You remember that was the big issue a few weeks ago. But anyway, so I don't know if that was worthwhile to spend the beginning of the program talking about that with Richard Engel and that trench in Ukraine, but Chuck Todd makes up for it a little bit with the best, longest summary of my main topic, which I'll show at the end of the news summaries because it came later in the program, not at the beginning. But like I said, the Fox News Sunday news summary was very similar to the Meet the Press news summary. They focused more on how Biden has let China and Russia become too close, and it's a big threat to U.S. national security. And they talk about the Beijing Olympics. They talk about the genocide of the Uyghurs, and that Uyghur athlete who was one of the torchbearers at the Beijing Olympics. And anyway, this is Martha MacCallum and Alexandria Hoff for Fox News Sunday with a very similar news summary, but spun more to the right. I think you'll see after we watch it together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. A contentious Winter Olympics now underway in Beijing, but it is the Chinese and Russian presidents who say they're now on the same team in a global power competition as tensions rise on the Ukraine border and the United States sends troops to the region. In a moment, we'll speak with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, but first to Alex Hoff with the latest from the White House. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Martha. Yeah, the U.S. is joined by countries like Australia, the U.K., India, and various other nations in a diplomatic boycott of the Games, citing China's abysmal human rights record. In particular, the focus is on the Chinese government's treatment of their Muslim minority.
In an obvious statement to critics, China elected to have an opening ceremony torch carried by a cross-country skier who is part of China's Uyghur population, an ethnic minority group victim to what the U.S. has equated to genocide by the Chinese government.
We should not allow Communist China to whitewash what they're doing, whether it's what they're doing to the Uyghurs, what they've done to the Hong Kong citizens, or their threats to Taiwan right now.
End Uyghur genocide!
A protest and sit-in was held by human rights advocates at NBC's headquarters, calling on the network to cease broadcasting the 2022 Games. The controversial Olympic backdrop provided the space for a meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two leaders expressed solidarity through a joint statement, saying they, quote, oppose the abuse of democratic values and interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states under the pretext of protecting democracy and human rights. While the U.S., allies, or Ukraine were not mentioned in the lengthy statement, tension was between the lines, as the Pentagon revealed it has evidence of a Moscow plan to fake a Ukrainian attack on Russia.
We know that they're thinking about doing it. And that's just one of other things that we know they're trying to do to create a pretext for an invasion.
U.S. and European efforts towards a diplomatic solution continue. French President Emmanuel Macron has spoken to Putin 3 times since last Friday. He will visit Moscow Monday and then head to Kyiv Tuesday alongside German foreign ministers.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is scheduled to visit the White House here tomorrow to discuss with President Biden ways to deter an invasion. Martha?
Alex, thank you very much. Alex Hoff reporting from the White House. Joining us now, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, welcome back.
See, just like I said, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was on multiple programs. I don't have a clip of him because I'm not really covering the Ukraine story. I guess if there's a major invasion of Ukraine by Russia, then that will be the top story, and I will be covering that that week. But if it's going to happen, it'll probably happen sometime in the next few weeks. after the Olympics, maybe, or that that's kind of what the NBC News Meet the Press news summary was implying there. And then there's like a limited period of time when the ground is frozen and the Russian tanks don't sink in the mud, and that's like starting now. So I guess we'll see whether that was the most important story. But that's what NBC and Fox News both decided to lead the programs with, as opposed to the next three news summaries, which are all on my main topic. My main topic of the Republican National Committee claiming that the January 6th insurrection is legitimate political discourse, along with the statement that former Vice President Mike Pence made on Friday to the Federalist Society that President Trump was wrong when he said that Pence had the power to overturn the results of the election on January 6th. And anyway, you'll see that covered in the next three news summaries, starting with the CNN State of the Union news summary that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is wondering if we're about to emerge from a rough couple years. President Biden is enjoying a week of...
Oh, and the one thing that I forgot to say about the CNN, I should have completely pre-criticized the clip and point out that for the last couple weeks, a lot of the news programs have been talking about how Biden's had a bad week, one of his worst weeks, a bad week after week. Well, here you see CNN at least giving the other side when it looks like he had kind of a good week over in this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is wondering if we're about to emerge from a rough couple years. President Biden is enjoying a week of positive headlines for the first time in quite some time. A January jobs report that far surpassed expectations. Good news in the pandemic as COVID cases and hospitalizations plummet. But the president's agenda is still mired in Washington, D.C. dysfunction. The president has had trouble getting all 50 Democrats in the Senate to support his plans. And support from Republicans has been rare, as the GOP remains completely cowed in many instances by the shadow of former President Trump. On Friday, the Republican National Committee declared the events on January 6, 2021, quote, legitimate political discourse, and censured the only two House Republicans on the committee investigating the attack, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, making the notion of compromise seem almost quaint. But just a day before, President Biden returned to one of the major themes of his campaign and his career, bringing Americans together at the National Prayer Breakfast, calling Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell a friend, and calling for Americans to put aside their differences.
How do we unite us again? Unity is elusive, but it's really actually necessary. Unity doesn't mean we have to agree on everything, but unity is where enough of us believe in a core of basic things. There's so much at stake. The division has become so palpable.
Now, not everyone agrees it's possible or even desirable to try to heal those divisions. And yet, in a 50-50 Senate and a bitterly divided country, bipartisanship is necessary for the nation to move forward. In the past several weeks, we have featured bipartisan conversations on the show, and this morning, we're going to take on the very idea of unity in a very special conversation, an exclusive interview with two of the most powerful senators in Washington, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who is here for her first Sunday show in more than 5 years and has bucked the majority in her party on issues from health care to the Supreme Court, along with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who has been one of the deciding votes on.
And I will have a clip of that joint interview. And I've been talking about that for several weeks, how like these days it's like a big surprise when they have a Republican and a Democrat willing to appear together, even though back when I started watching these Sunday morning news analysis shows in the 1980s, that was like what they did every week. It was like a Republican and a Democrat on debating some issue. Now it's like a rare surprise when they agree to appear together. But I'll have Lisa Murkowski and Joe Manchin talking about the legitimate political discourse comment a little bit later. But I want to finish the last two news summaries. ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos also covers the legitimate political discourse and the Mike Pence controversies over in this clip.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. Regardless of your personal ideology, it was an extraordinary moment in political history. Long simmering divisions over the future of the Republican Party burst open Friday, fueled by Donald Trump's repeated lie over the 2020 election and the mob that descended on the Capitol 13 months ago today. A party that once denounced acts of violence on January 6th now now turned on its own as the Republican National Committee formally censured lawmakers Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger for investigating the assault on the nation's capital, an event the RNC suggested was legitimate political discourse. Donald Trump's transformation of the Republican Party is undeniable, which is what made what happened just hours after that RNC vote all the more extraordinary. After years of fierce loyalty amid relentless pressure from his old boss to overturn the 2020 election results, Mike Pence unleashed a stunning rebuke of Donald Trump by name.
I heard this week that President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election. But President Trump is wrong. There is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
And joining us now to make sense of this key moment in our political discourse, Chief Washington Correspondent John Karl, Chris Christie, former Republican governor of New Jersey, and Sarah Isgur, a veteran of the Trump Justice Department.
And I will actually, my other clip that I'm going to show you from ABC's This Week will be Martha Raddatz talking to Chris Christie about the legitimate political discourse statement from the Republican National Committee, because I think actually Chris Christie had a couple insights I didn't hear anywhere else and I thought were important. But I'll get to that in a few minutes. But now I want to show you the shortest of the news summaries. CBS News Face the Nation, covering again the legitimate political discourse and comment, and Mike Pence saying that Donald Trump was wrong over in this clip.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. There is an overwhelming amount of news this morning, especially on the international front, but we want to start with two extraordinary developments that threaten to further divide the Republican Party and impact our democracy. Late Friday, Republican National Committee members voted to censure Representatives Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger for their work on the committee investigating the attack on the Capitol and the attempt to overturn election results, saying the two were part of a, quote, Democrat-led persecution of ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse. The former vice president, Mike Pence, rebuked President Trump's insistence that Pence could have rejected the Electoral College results on January 6th.
I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president. Under the Constitution, I had no right to change the outcome of our election.
We begin with Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio. He is.
And I will have a clip of Marco Rubio who defends the RNC legitimate political discourse comment. I think he's the only one. Well, Mark Short kind of defends it a little bit too. But those are the 5 news summaries. You see how the shorter ones focused on what I thought was the main topic, the RNC censuring Kinzinger and Cheney and calling January 6th insurrection legitimate political discourse, and then Mike Pence saying that Donald Trump was wrong, that he had the power to overturn the election results on January 6th. And I praised the last 3 and criticized NBC and Fox News for focusing on Ukraine and the Beijing Olympics and the increased alliance between Russia and China. But I did say NBC News Meet the Press later had a longer news summary later in the program that was on the main topic, and it had like the pre-recorded package. So I'm kind of suspicious maybe this was supposed to be the top story, and then they moved it down to get Richard Engel's live report from Ukraine at the beginning, or I don't know why. But anyway, here's the longer news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press on the main topic before I get to the newsmaker clips over here.
Welcome back. 2 events on Friday helped illustrate the centrality of January 6th and its aftermath inside the Republican Party these days. First, the Republican National Committee censured Representatives Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger for participating in the Congressional Committee investigating January 6th. Hours later, former Vice President Mike Pence said Donald Trump was wrong when he claims that Pence could have overturned the 2020 election. Mr. Pence made his remarks as more information has emerged on Mr. Trump's efforts to stay in power after losing the election.
President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election.
Former Vice President Mike Pence on Friday, responding to Mr. Trump's false claim that he could have rejected the Electoral College results. Pence also breaking with Trump on the insurrection itself.
January 6th was a dark day in the history of the United States Capitol.
As the National Archives announced it is preparing to release his records to the committee next month. The January 6th committee has issued dozens of subpoenas, interviewed 400 witnesses, and obtained over 50,000 documents. Under this increased pressure, Mr. Trump is now defending the insurrectionists.
If I run and if I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. We will treat them fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons.
Among the recent revelations about his efforts to overturn the election, Mr. Trump reportedly directed his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to ask the Department of Homeland Security if it could legally take control of voting machines in swing states.
He needs to seize all of these Dominion and these other voting machines that we have across the country.
A question he also raised with Attorney General Bill Barr regarding the Justice Department.
I see no basis now for seizing machines by the federal government.
In Georgia, a criminal probe is heating up, centered on the phone call Trump placed to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger on January 2nd, demanding he produce more votes in a state Joe Biden had won.
I just want to find 11,780 votes. So tell me, Brad, what are we going to do?
We realize that we're coming to a place that there are enough people that will require a subpoena for us to speak to or for us to be able to get information. And so, yes, we're headed into phase 2.
In addition, Mr. Trump attempted to employ a slate of alternate electors. Memos published this week by the New York Times were used by Giuliani and lawyer John Eastman as they developed a strategy intended to exploit ambiguities in the Electoral Count Act.
You should exercise your prerogative to legislatively designate a slate of electors.
On January 4th, Trump and Pence met at the White House with Eastman about his memo, laying out steps Pence could take to delay certification and keep Trump in power. In effect, a blueprint for a coup. With Mr. Trump squeezed, his allies are hitting back. A year ago, on January 6th, the RNC issued a statement saying its members strongly condemned the violence, calling it an attack on our country and its founding principles. But now,
all of those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. The Republican Party declared Friday the January 6th attack was simply ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse. Joining me now is Mark Short. He's Mr. Pence's former chief of staff.
And the next clip will actually be from former Vice President Pence's former chief of staff, Mark Short. And I'll show you Chuck Todd asking him questions about the what Mike Pence experienced on January 6th and whether it was legitimate political discourse. But as usual, Chuck Todd asks a good question, but then is really bad at following up when Mark Short kind of pretends that what happened on January 6th and what the January 6th Commission is investigating is people engaged in, legitimate political protest or legitimate political discourse, and lets him get away with it. But I do think that this week Chuck Todd again did have the best, longest package. It just wasn't at the beginning of the program. I think that was the best summary of the January 6th insurrection being called legitimate political discourse by the Republican National Committee, as well as Mike Pence saying that Trump was wrong to say he had the power to overturn the election, because it included a lot more context about how the, what the January 6th Commission is finding out, some of the details, the seizing of the voting machines that came out this week, the Bill Barr rejection, the John Eastman and Michael Flynn and all the conspirators who, I hope it turned, I was saying how the Presidential Records Act is not a crime, but there are a lot of crimes that were committed around January 6th, and I just hope that it doesn't end up like the torture during the George W. Bush administration, where like Obama came in and said, okay, we don't want to be looking backward and criticizing the former administration, so we're going to let them get away with torture. Well, I just hope they don't let them get away with the insurrection, but I actually am not all that optimistic, just because that's the way our justice system works. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm going to show you several different people responding or several different ways newsmakers, or I mean, some of them are newsmakers, some of them are pundits, but Chris Christie is a newsmaker pundit. That's the second to last one. And then the last one is Juan Williams, the pundit on Fox News Sunday, responding to the comment about legitimate political discourse, because that was the first time it came up in Fox News Sunday, like 47 minutes into the program, which is kind of ridiculous. But I'll start with Mark Short. And like I said, he talks about what the vice president knew and saw on January 6th in this clip. But then Chuck Todd lets him get away with really mischaracterizing what people were doing on January 6th and what the January 6th Commission is doing, or committee in the House is doing, what it's investigating, which I will talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
The vice president ever talk with the president that day? On January 6th, while he was in the Capitol?
They did not have conversations.
Did he try?
I had a conversation with the chief of staff during that.
And at what did you get evidence, was the president checking on the vice president's safety at any point in time during that period?
I think it was communicated by both Keith Kellogg and by myself to Mark Meadows.
Communicated what?
That we were safe and secure in the location that we were in.
Describe what you saw that day.
Well, I think that from the time that the vice president was evacuated, I came back up to his office in the suite right off of the Senate floor. And at that point, Secret Service had tried to move him twice, but the vice president was resolute and said, I'm not going to let the free world see us flee in the Capitol, and I'm staying. But the third time, the head of our security, Tim, said, there's a glass door here, and I can't protect you. We need to move you. And at that point, they evacuated us into a secure location at the bottom of the Capitol. You know, at one point there was an attempt to again put the vice president into a motorcade. Yeah. But he was clear to say, that's not a visual I want the world to see of us fleeing the Capitol. And we stayed there and worked to try and bring the business back together and complete the work that night.
Did you ever hear those chants, hang back Pence?
I did not.
Did he ever did?
I'm sure we've all seen it.
Now you've seen it since then, but in the moment, had you heard it or any of that?
In the moment I did, and I don't know whether he did.
What was your reaction when you heard it?
I mean, look, I think that, again, there was a sense of tragic day, sense of loss, but also a sense of that pride in what we'd accomplished for 4 years and feeling that this was going to be an unfortunate taint on that record, and looking at some of the people who we never recognized as people we saw in rallies traveling the country. And I think it's unfortunate that for 74 million Americans who voted for the Trump-Pence record, that in many ways that's tarnished by, candidly, Chuck, some of the media want to portray all those 74 million as represented by a few hundred thugs who were at the Capitol that day.
Did you see legitimate political discourse that day?
From my front row seat, I did not see a lot of legitimate political discourse. But, Chuck, to your question, you know, in talking to some members of the RNC, I think there is concern that there are people who were there peacefully protesting who have been pulled into this, what I think is more become a prosecution by the January 6th committee, and feel like they're being unfairly treated.
Let me ask you about a few other things that have come to light.
See, Chuck Todd does not follow up on that. Like, who is being unfairly prosecuted for political or legitimate political discourse, who are just protesting and have now been prosecuted, or being prosecuted by the January 6th committee doesn't even prosecute people. So I don't know what that was about. I don't know the unfortunate taint. I don't know what the unfortunate taint thing is, but is there such a thing as a fortunate taint? Every time I hear it, I've heard that clip 3 times, and every time I hear it, the words unfortunate taint stick in my head for some reason. I don't know why, but anyway, you can let me know what you think about Mark Short's defense there of the January 6th insurrectionists as, people who were engaging in legitimate political protests and are now being persecuted. There's some of those, apparently, according to Mark Short, and that's also the case when you see the answer from Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who was over on CBS News' Face the Nation, talking to Margaret Brennan, both about what Mike Pence said. This is, but if you hear Margaret Brennan both tries to get him to see if he agrees with Mike Pence that Trump was wrong, and he'll see he doesn't say Trump was wrong, he just says Mike Pence was right. I don't know if that's a distinction that's going to save him from losing Trump voters, or he's got an election coming up. But then he does kind of the same thing you heard from Mark Short, where he smears the January 6th committee investigation, even though they found out a lot of really startling facts already. And he tries to defend the people who engaged in violence and vandalism as legitimate political discourse, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch Margaret Brennan questioning Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Oh, and he doesn't take a drink. No, he doesn't do a Marco Rubio anywhere during this clip. I guess, I don't know, maybe he doesn't have the dry mouth problem anymore. Anyway, I'll talk about, probably not that, but I'll talk about something more after we watch that clip together over here.
I invited you to come on this show to talk about China. I want to get there, but I have to start here. Do you agree with Mike Pence?
Well, if President Trump runs for re-election, I believe he would defeat Joe Biden, and I don't want Kamala Harris to have the power as vice president to overturn that election. And that's the same thing that I concluded back in January of 2021.
So Donald Trump was wrong?
Well, as I said, I just don't think a vice president has that power, because if the vice president has that power, Donald Trump would defeat Joe Biden in 4 years or 2 years, and then Kamala Harris can decide not to overturn the election. I don't want to wind up there.
Right. So, yes. So this appears a turning point for the party, though. Does the RNC speak for you when it says that this is a Democrat-led persecution of ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse? Was January 6th legitimate political discourse?
Well, anybody who committed crimes on January 6th should be prosecuted. If you entered the Capitol and you committed acts of violence and you were there to hurt people, you should be prosecuted, and they are being prosecuted. But the January 6th Commission is not the place to do that. That's what prosecutors are supposed to do. This commission is a partisan scam. They're going after, the purpose of that commission is to try to embarrass and smear and harass as many Republicans as they can get their hands on.
That's what you believe your two Republican colleagues are doing? Liz Cheney
I believe that's what that commission is doing. Well, let me tell you, I know that's what that commission is doing, because they're focused well beyond January 6th. There are people, for example, like an older member of the RNC whose husband just died, and she wasn't even in Washington on January 6th.
But that's not what the censure said.
She signed some papers. She wasn't even in Washington on January 6th. She can't afford to lawyer up, and she's being harassed by this commission. This commission is nothing but a partisan tool designed to go out and smear and attack and get their hands on as many people as they can, including people that weren't in Washington on January 6th.
Okay, sounds like you say they do speak for you. Let's get to China.
Well, I told you where I stand on that commission. I think that commission is a scam. I think it's a complete partisan scam, and I think anyone who committed a crime on January 6th should be prosecuted and, if convicted, put in jail. I do not believe that we need a congressional committee to harass Americans that weren't even in Washington on January 6th. We're not in favor of what happened on that day, have condemned what happened on that day, but they want to smear them anyway. I'm against that, yes.
So, I don't know, there you heard it sounds like those are going to be the talking points of the pro-Trump Republicans, the Trump wing of the Republican Party, how they're going to try to smear the January 6th Commission. That's why, after long negotiations, bipartisan negotiations, where it was going to be one of those special commissions like the 9/11 Commission, where it was going to be one of those select committees that was equal Republicans and Democrats, and it had all been negotiated, and then Republicans at the last minute decided to tank that idea because it would give too much legitimacy to the investigation. And so they decided to make it a partisan committee, and then they tried to put Jim Jordan, who's a material witness. It turns out he talked to Trump the morning of January 6th, and the other representative, Jim, what's his name? Jim Bowen? I can't remember, but there are a couple partisan Republicans who were that Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy had appointed to the January 6th committee that were obviously there just to blow up the whole thing, and so Nancy Pelosi rejected them and ended up putting Representative Adam Kinzinger and Representative Liz Cheney as the two Republicans to make it a bipartisan committee, with Liz Cheney as the vice chair of the committee. I think they've already revealed a lot of stuff, and in the next several months they're apparently going to hold some public hearings where you're going to see them put the whole narrative together, kind of like you saw in that NBC News Meet the Press summary after the news summaries, where it becomes a story that is kind of compelling and disturbing about how in the months after the November election, the Trump administration tried to do all these nefarious things so that the will of the American people and not only the popular vote, but the majority of votes in the Electoral College all were supposed to go to Joe Biden, did go to Joe Biden, but they had all these schemes and lies and conspiracy theories that they were planning to use to stop that from happening. And it's, I mean, it's a good thing it didn't work, but it came pretty close, and it's still ongoing, and it's kind of a travesty that one of the two political parties in the United States now has, like, as a litmus test for being a good Republican, you have to believe the big lie, you have to, you know, put your rational faculties in a blind trust to whatever the emotional whims of Donald Trump are. It's anyway, that's kind of what you saw there from Marco Rubio, and I think Mark Short and Marco Rubio are the two examples of the extreme Republican talking points that I think are going to be heard on that. And then I'm going to compare that to the next two Republicans. One is Lisa Murkowski, who is one of the most centrist of the Republicans, often goes against the party line. She was on CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper and Joe Manchin. I showed you the news summary from CNN earlier, where it ended with Jake Tapper talking about the big surprise, unusual event where a Republican and a Democrat appear together. Well, here's Jake Tapper asking Lisa Murkowski, who already tweeted something rejecting the legitimate political discourse claim from the Republican National Committee. But then I think Jake Tapper's a little bit soft on Lisa Murkowski, not really nailing her down on how, you know, her party is basically enthralled to Donald Trump. And then Jake Tapper does this weird thing where he transitions over to Joe Manchin and asks him about his opposition to Build Back Better. And he says, well, I know it's not the same thing, but he kind of does make it seem like they're comparable. Even though he says he doesn't, he kind of does. And that's enough pre-criticism for the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
No, for partisan politics, right? And I dare say it's a little weirder for Republicans. Right now, the RNC, just on Friday, censured Cheney and Kinzinger, two very conservative members of Congress, because they're participating in the investigation into January 6th. And in fact, they accused Kinzinger and Cheney of participating in the, quote, persecution of ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse. Now, you tweeted yesterday that description is just plain wrong. We cannot allow a false narrative to be created. It must be uncomfortable to be a non-rigidly partisan person during this period.
During this period, yes. But it can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable when you say, I'm not going to align myself neatly with what the party is saying just because the party is saying. You've got to be comfortable enough in who you are and who you represent and why you're here. I mean, I'm not here to be the representative of the Republican Party. I'm here to be the representative for Alaskan people. And I take that charge very, very seriously. So when there is a conflict, when the party is taking an approach or saying things that I think are just absolutely wrong, I think it's my responsibility as an Alaskan senator speaking out for Alaskans to just speak the truth. And I think that that's hard because we seek protection in our lanes over to the right and over to the left. And that gives you company. But is that really why people sent you here? Is that really what they want? I don't think people in Alaska want that. I don't think people in West Virginia expect that. And so, yeah, it's harder. It is harder. The easier thing to do is just go along to get along.
Or just keep your mouth shut.
Just keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's not why we're here. We're here to do some hard things, and sometimes the hard things are to say, I want to get something done rather than just follow the messaging from our respective parties. Let's try to get something done.
I don't think politics was designed to be comfortable, but it sure as heck wasn't designed to be miserable. Okay? And it's almost turned into a miserable situation because common sense and just civility, collegiality, all the things that you would think that should go with it and you've heard about and the way it used to work, we're working like the Dickens. We have to work harder now to be together, to work on things together, basically to buck our leadership maybe at times. We've been very fortunate, our leadership, Schumer, he understands what we're trying to do. He's been absolutely positive. He says, well, if you can get something done, do it. I've gone over and talked to Mitch. Mitch has been supportive of things that we're doing now. So basically they understand, and I think they all want us to work together. And like I said, it should not be miserable, and I'm not going to be in a miserable situation when I have good friends I can work with.
Yeah, but now you're under fire. It's not the same thing, obviously, but you're under fire for not supporting changing the filibuster rules so as to pass the election reform bills. Bernie Sanders has said he supports a primary challenge to you and to Senator Sinema. Schumer has not said that he is endorsing you.
We've talked about that and everything, and I told Chuck and I were talking the other day, and I said, Chuck, basically the best thing to say that I would think in a situation like that, but they're going to support. I don't know, no way, shape, or form will Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer not support their caucus. Right. It just doesn't happen. Now, with that being said, I'd have said, sometimes you tell me, Jake, I want to be for you. I can be for you or against you. What helps you the most?
Yeah.
And Chuck, it might be funny. In Chuck's situation, he'll say, Joe, I can be for you or against you. What would help the most? With that, you put a little levity to that, but I don't put any stock in that. I've had a primary. I've been running since 1982. Yeah. I have never run unopposed.
I'll be there for you, Joe.
You're going to endorse him?
Endorse me?
If he's running, I'm endorsing him.
See, there we go.
Is just a quick follow-up on something I asked in the previous segment. Have you talked to the president?
So, yeah, actually, Joe Manchin endorsed Lisa Murkowski, and, the Democrat Joe Manchin endorsed the Republican Lisa Murkowski in her run this year, and then they cross-endorsed each other there. But I actually almost used that one sort of like bit of levity joke there from Joe Manchin as my political comedy. I don't know if you caught what he said there, but he's basically saying, well, in West Virginia, it might be better if I got like the liberal Jew from New York, Chuck Schumer, to say that he's not endorsing me. I mean, that was kind of the subtext there. Liberal Jew from New York, Chuck Schumer, may not be the best endorsement for Joe Manchin in West Virginia. I don't know. But also, I don't know, that whole conversation, I'm not sure I agree. It's like a big philosophical conversation about what the point of a elected representative is. Is the point of the elected representative to fulfill the party platform that you as a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, should I expect the Democrat that I elect to Congress to vote yes on all the points for the Democratic Party? Or am I electing an individual who I think is, a person of good conscience, who I believe in, who should go and use their best judgment and decide when they get there, and that will not go along with the party line. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, most of the time, I would prefer if my Democratic representative in Congress, Ami Bera, he's the representative from my district. I'd like it if he votes for what Nancy Pelosi wants him to vote for, and same thing in the Senate. I want my two Democratic senators from California to hold the line. I wish that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema would stick with the other 48 Democrats and create an exception to the filibuster so that we could get voting rights done. But that's not going to happen. And yeah, I mean, generally as a partisan Democrat, I would prefer the Democrats I elect to stick to the party line, but I can see how other people who vote for politicians without a specific detailed platform in mind might want those or want those politicians, vote for the person who they think has the best judgment and will go to Washington and listen to everybody and come to, I don't think there are many politicians that even do that. And certainly Joe Manchin, I believe, is much more influenced by some lobbyists. And of course, I talked about a few weeks ago, his personal family fortune in the coal industry and his ties to the fossil fuel industry. And I mean, is he really exercising conscience, or are there certain large contributors to his campaign that have asked him to be, to put a brake on anything happening? I mean, that's a lot of what happens especially in the Senate. But anyway, I think I've gone off on that for long enough, and I actually promised earlier I'd show you Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey, and I don't know, maybe future of the Republican Party. Stranger things have happened, because he's like a friend of Donald Trump who criticizes Donald Trump, but he never went in on the big lie. He criticized Trump. It was, like a few days after the election. It was like 1-2 days. He came out in the middle, late at night, and said, frankly, we did win this election. That whole thing where he started the big snowball that turned into January 6th insurrection and all that. Well, and Chris Christie called him out on that right then. But I don't know. It's weird, because Chris Christie kind of had the Trump personality before Trump, at least as a politician, where he was the person who would shout people down at public events and yell at teachers, and had the New Jersey bad attitude. And I don't know, he could be someone who could take over the Republican Party if it ever gets past whatever crisis it's in, unless whatever crisis the Republican Party is in takes over the United States, and we become a fascist regime, and that's not out of the question. But anyway, now I'm going off on a big tangent, and what I really wanted to do is show you Chris Christie doing what I said earlier in the show, making a couple points about the legitimate political discourse censure of Representative Adam Kinzinger and Representative Liz Cheney. He points out a couple things about that censure that nobody else really said, but are actually kind of insightful, both in terms of who the Republican National Committee is, and what they were trying to do and failed to do over in this clip.
How did the RNC get from originally condemning this to where they are now? And what do you see?
Well, let's remember
for the future of the party.
Well, let's remember, Martha, something. Let's remember something. This is just a majority of 168 people. And the RNC, most of those folks were put into place over the course of the 4 years by Donald Trump. And so it's certainly Romney McDaniel is carrying water for Donald Trump in this regard. And so let's not make it bigger than it is. I think that there's two mistakes here by the RNC, beside the obvious ones we've already discussed. First of all, they say that part of the reason for the resolution is they want to keep the focus on Joe Biden and the failures of the Democratic administration. Well, how'd that work for you? All anybody's talking about this weekend is this resolution, rather than talking about the failures of the Biden administration. And secondly, it's not picking up on what is, I sense, around the country from traveling around, a shift that is occurring, which is that people are tired of hearing about the 2020 election from Donald Trump and from some who support him. And what they want to hear about is, what are the Republican solutions for 2022 for what the Democrats in Congress and in the White House are doing to the country and not doing for the country.
And Sarah,
if we want to make sure we win the House and the Senate, then we've got to be able to get to that. And what the RNC has done and what Ronna McDaniel's done this weekend is to distract from that.
So yeah, there's Chris Christie, and oh, I apologize. I see. I was reading the live comments during that, and I saw Tom Trask commented, quote, "I can never get enough Chris Christie," unquote, said nobody ever. So, well, I don't know. I mean, first of all, I watched all of the Sunday shows, and only one person pointed out that the Republican National Committee that passed that resolution censuring Representative Adam Kinzinger and Representative Liz Cheney is made up of 168 people, many of whom were appointed by Donald Trump. And that is actually an important fact, right? I mean, it tells you something about where that came from, so I thought that was an important fact that nobody on any of the programs said except for Chris Christie. So despite Tom Trask's humorous comment there, I think that it was worth showing that Chris Christie comment. And then, of course, he also pointed out the whole point of the RNC statement was to take the focus off January 6th and put it on Joe Biden's, problems with inflation, et cetera, whatever it is, immigration, crime, the stuff they are like harping on all day, every day on Fox News. And then Chris Christie makes that comment, well, how'd that work out? Because as you saw from the news summaries, 3 of the news programs led with the legitimate political discourse thing. And even though Meet the Press didn't lead with it, they had that whole segment with the whole pre-recorded package. So, and yeah, it was a big topic all weekend. And so 2 insights from Chris Christie. I'm not saying I'm a fan of Chris Christie. I'm going to vote for Chris Christie. I'm just saying, and usually I don't even show the clips from the pundits, although he's kind of a newsmaker / pundit because, as I said before I showed the clip, there's some chance that he's the future of the Republican Party because, is it going to be Ron DeSantis? Is it going to be Larry Hogan from the moderate Republican of Maryland? Or is it going to be Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney? Probably not. Mike Pence? I mean, is it Donald Trump? I mean, that Donald Trump Jr.? Or I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago that maybe Tucker Carlson may end up being the Republican nominee in 2024. I saw somebody else say that over the weekend. I can't remember who. But anyway, before I finish, I do want to show you how Fox News Sunday covered the legitimate political discourse comment, because if you go through the transcript, it never shows up till 47 minutes into the program, where Martha MacCallum asks their token liberal on the panel, Juan Williams, about it. And she doesn't even ask him about legitimate political discourse. She asks about the entire statement from, or this whole big sentence from the RNC, where they kind of hide legitimate political discourse in the middle. That's something I learned as a lawyer. If you want to hide something, you put it in the middle, because memory has this thing called primacy. You remember the stuff at the beginning, and recency, you remember the stuff at the end. There's no middle C. You don't remember the stuff in the middle. So they hid it in the middle, but Juan Williams still talked about it. And then by the time you get to the end of this clip, Martha MacCallum kind of lies, as I'll explain after we watch that final newsmaker clip for the program today together over here.
There's also the censure, Juan, RNC censure of 2 members of Congress, and I want to put it up on the screen. Participating in a Democrat-led persecution of ordinary citizens, engaged in legitimate political discourse, and they are both utilizing their past professed political affiliation to mask Democrat abuse of prosecutorial power for partisan purposes. Your thoughts on that censure?
Wow, legitimate political discourse is the line that's gotten everybody's attention, Martha.
Yes.
I think it was carefully worded and written with the intent to support former President Trump and, what's called the big lie about January 6th. The cleanup afterwards was pretty pathetic because of the fallout from the use of that phrase, legitimate political discourse. What happened, everyone in the world saw it on tape, you can watch it today, was not legitimate political discourse. There was an effort by the RNC chair to say, well, she was not talking about the violence, she was talking about everything before, but clearly everything that happened before and during this episode, is defined by the violence, police being hit with bear spray, speared with flagpoles, people dying. That's not legitimate political discourse. And, again,
I think that it's in service to President Trump's narcissism. It's all about him. I don't think this is helping the Republican Party going forward. And I think it just opens them up to
Let's talk about the
widespread
Republican
criticism.
Party going forward, because President Trump was able to sort of discuss politics and midterm realities with Benny Moreno, who's a Republican candidate for U.S. Senate in Ohio. He dropped out of that crowded primary. So, Jillian, how much does it appear that President Trump is really influencing a lot of what's happening out there with regard to the midterms?
Martha, I just want to flag, he also in a statement a couple of days ago said that he thinks America is going to hell. So he clearly doesn't have a very optimistic outlook going forward. I don't know what that says about him as a politician. I will say with the two measures you just talked about, former Vice President Pence's comments combined with the GOP's censure of Cheney and Kinzinger, they really, I mean, the Republican Party this week really codified this litmus test that has been in place now for the better part of a year. This litmus test goes something, to the tune of, was January 6th an insurrection, right? And if you're a politician, if you're a candidate right now, and your answer is yes, you are in mortal peril. Odds are you're not going to survive the next midterm elections, and your career is dead in the water. I think both these things were like looming huge elephants in the room over the better part of a year, and now they are putting them all out there.
Yeah, Josh, I'm thinking back to my discussion earlier with Senator John Barrasso. He said, because I asked him to respond to these issues, he said, this is not on people's list. It's not what people are talking about in Wyoming. When I go out and hear what concerns them, they're really concerned about inflation. We know Americans are very concerned about crime, which we spoke about in the last block. So, how much of this really matters in the midterms? But obviously, the behind-the-scenes king-making stuff probably matters more for these candidates than the issue. The larger issue underlying.
Yeah, I mean, look, of course, Senator Barrasso.
So, yeah, Martha MacCallum claims to have brought this up in her interview previously with Wyoming Senator John Barrasso, and I don't have a clip of that, but what she said is not true. I mean, she brought up what Mike Pence said when he said Mike Pence said Trump was wrong, that I had the power to overturn the election on January 6th. She asked him, do you agree with Mike Pence? And then she asked him if he agreed with the censure of Liz Cheney, because he's the senator from Wyoming and she's from Wyoming. But the words legitimate political discourse, that quote never came up in the interview with John Barrasso. As I told you before I showed that clip, the phrase legitimate political discourse did not come up till that question that Martha MacCallum asked Juan Williams, and his answer, that it came up a few times in his answer there, but that was the only time in the whole program. And then did you notice how Jillian Turner, the other pundit there, Martha MacCallum and everyone lets her get away with saying the litmus test to be in the Republican Party is, do you say January 6th was an insurrection or not? And that's like the worst framing of the litmus test, because I mean, that is sort of, was it just a riot or was it an insurrection? That's actually kind of debatable. Some people have been charged with sedition. I sometimes get comments from people saying, oh, no one's been charged with insurrection, so it's not an insurrection. But, insurrection also has like a dictionary meaning, which kind of fits the situation, and people have been charged with sedition now. But anyway, that is not the litmus test. The litmus test is, do you believe the big lie that the election was stolen from Trump and Biden didn't really win legitimately? And do you believe, as I was saying earlier, are you enthralled to the Trump personality cult where whatever he says, you buy into all his conspiracy theories and you vote for his crazy candidates, and that's the litmus test. But anyway, so Jillian Turner got away with that, which I didn't think was legitimate political discourse, but I thought it was more dishonest political discourse, if you ask me. But anyway, that is the last of the Newsmaker clips. I saw a nice super chat contribution from Tom Trask, so thank you for that. If you want to support my videos financially, keep me doing this through the November election, which I'm considering based on, how many Patreon patrons I have that give me monthly support, how many direct PayPal contributions I get that I put links right below the video that you can participate in that. Right below, I also did a Thursday live stream on the ACLU Free Speech and Critical Race Theory. That's the first link I put right below the video if you're interested in seeing my take on that. And anyway, like I said, I'll probably keep doing this live stream through the November midterms, depending on the support I get, like I did from Matthew and Tom Trask today and all my Patreon patrons. And you can also click the member button underneath the video and get a YouTube membership. But anyway, I know I also have some Dash and Sandy or Dandy fans out there who want to see a clip of my dog Sandy and my cat Dash. And you know, I tried to get a good clip of them in that hallway over there earlier today because I was kind of rushed, and I have to say I was a little disappointed in the results. This is one of those situations where I think all the action in the clip comes from me moving the camera. I apologize for that, but you can see Dash, you can see Sandy, so it is technically a dandy clip to finish the show over here. So anyway, there you go. I guess at the very beginning there was that Dash the cat did that head shake. That's kind of a cool thing to get on video. But anyway, maybe I'll have a better Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip next week. Until next week, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I'll be back next Monday, like I said. And as usual, I have a Zoom meeting coming up in 3 minutes, so I have what they call in the news business a hard break. I got to finish up, but I appreciate all of you who showed up for the live show. I appreciate the recorded show viewers who make comments, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. I'm supposed to say all those things, right? Anyway, I guess that's it. And until next week, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.